Hey guys, Pete here. I wanted to go over the concept of the different pricing methods, and I wanted to make sure that you understand why we have put together net profit pricing, which obviously is a full course, but I wanted to share with all of the subscribers the importance of this so that you get it, okay? So just covering real quickly, traditional pricing, when we're looking at our accounting, and by the way, your accountant's looking at one set of numbers for their purposes, you're going to need other numbers for your purposes, and some of the data that it takes in order to calculate these things is a little different than what you're going to find on your P&L. But fundamentally, we've got three categories. There's what's called COGS, SG&A, selling, general, and administrative, we call that overhead, and then EBIT, earnings before income tax, or net profit, we like to call that. So these are the three key elements that we're looking at whenever we're calculating our prices. And so it's important to understand that your overhead, that's all the bills in the office, plus your net profit, that's what you got left over after all the bills are paid, equals your gross profit. So in this example, if we had a business that did $1 million worth of revenues and their overhead was $300,000 for the entire year, all the office staff salaries and the rent, the insurance, the advertising, all that stuff, that would be running about 30%. 30% traditionally has been about right for the overall business. We'd like to be a little leaner these days if possible, but in this case, we're saying that this company would make $100,000, which would be 10% of the total sales. So 10% net profit. Okay, what a lot of companies will do is they'll just take the 10%, they'll add it to the 30%, and they say, hey, we've got a 40% gross margin or gross profit. So the gross profit is your overhead plus your net profit, okay? And they'll use that to calculate everything. Hey, if it's a $1,000 job and I've got $400 above and beyond my COGS or direct costs, then I'm okay. Well, yes and no. Here's the problem: departmentalization. You see, your installation department has a different percentage of overhead than your service does. Service tends to have a lot more overhead, and then your maintenance has a lot less. Okay, so and then your accessory sales. Each of these carry a unique overhead dollar amount, and that's why when we use percentages, this is very dangerous. We used to use the old time and material, which is even worse because, in some ways it's better. We're keeping better track of our labor. But, how do you know what to mark up your labor? How do you know what to mark up your parts? You'd literally have to be able to predict the future and know how many hours you're going to be billing and how much and what parts in dollars and cents you're actually going to be selling so that you can affix an overhead to that and then divide that in and calculate this thing out. And guys, unless you have really good historical data and year to year your sales are about the same, then you're going to be off, especially if you don't have any historical data or if you are going into a new economy, right? And you just don't know. So let me show you an example down here. This is on a change out. So if we had a $3,500 worth of equipment and we had $500 worth of material, $600 worth of labor, $500 sub, and $100 permit, our COGS would be $5,200. So if we use that method up there of 40%, but let's say we wanted 45% because we want to make a little bit more profit, maybe 50%, we would divide the reciprocal. And so we would take 5,200 and divide that by 0.55, and that's going to give us $9,454, which is the total, 45% of which would be gross profit. So in theory, if we're doing this percentage method and we had a 30% overhead, then the overhead that we would be building into that job would be $2,838.37. But what is your true overhead for that day for that department? Is it $2,800? Now check this out. What if instead of it being a $3,500 piece of equipment, everything else is the same, and it's a $5,500 piece of equipment, use the same multiplier. Now all of a sudden 40% of or 30% of that is going to be almost $4,000. So is your overhead almost $4,000 or is your overhead almost $3,000? Here's another scenario. Let's say that the materials were $500 and the labor was actually 2 days, and let's make that $1,100. I can take the cue out, doing this on the fly. $1,100 because it's a 2-day job, and we do the same divisor method. We divide it by 0.45. I'm sorry, 1.55, so we get a 45% GP. That's our selling price. Well, wow, we made a $3,000 GP, right? That's all good except for it took us 2 days. So now we're making an overhead of $1,500 plus some change per day. Is that our overhead, or is $3,900 our overhead, or is $2,800 our overhead? This is why we use net profit. We actually don't calculate on our overhead by a percentage. What you'll want to do is understand your overhead, get that calculated in and departmentalized, divide that by the units sold, and actually know exactly how much to the penny that you have to charge in overhead for every job. It doesn't matter if it's installation, doesn't matter if it's service and repair in your flat rate, doesn't matter if you're maintenance. And so that is how to do it accurately. I'm telling you guys, going into this economy, it's nice to have all that extra, and a lot of the businesses have gotten really fat off of this, but times are changing. You're not going to be able to hit those numbers like that going into this new economy. It ain't going to happen. And what's going to happen is people are going to start cutting costs unless they understand to the dollar how much your COGS is, the cost of goods sold, in other words, the parts, the materials, the labor, burdened labor, fuel expenses, and everything else, what that truly costs, and then your overhead to the exact dollar. Once you understand that, you know what's called your break-even point, exactly what it costs you to do that job. And everything above that is net profit. So that's why we call it net profit, because you'll hit your overhead, we'll add the net profit to it, and it's based on the type of work it's done. There's a market value based on these already out there. And so some jobs will have one net profit and others will have others. But the point is, we know exactly what our cost is. We know exactly what our overhead is. And therefore, we know exactly what we need to charge in order to stay in business and keep the doors open and make sure the bills get paid. B. Ramsey here. I hope you like this. There's more in the actual course. Check out the link below. Hopefully, you'll come jump in and actually get all the tools to come with this training. But for this aspect, or for this particular part, for my subscribers out there, I hope you enjoyed that. B. Ramsey here. HVAC greatness. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.